academician Natalia Petrovna Bekhtereva, a name that is impossible to pronounce without admiration, a great neurophysiologist whose discoveries overturned the understanding of the human brain. For decades, she headed the Institute of the Human Brain of the Russian Academy of Sciences and became famous as a scientist of a global level. She was not just a researcher, she was a woman legend, so outstanding that a real star on the celestial map is named after her. Imagine this: a star shining in the cosmos bears the name of a person from Earth, a sign of recognition of the scale of a personality that falls to only a few. She dedicated her life to the science of what has always remained a mystery: thinking, memory, emotions, and the internal processes that govern a human being. The works of Bekhtereva became the foundation for entire directions of modern neurophysiology, but at the same time, her image was always greater than dry scientific formulas. She combined the cool-headedness of a researcher with the boldness of a thinker, ready to step beyond the boundaries of the familiar. That is precisely why Natalia Petrovna was called a unique phenomenon of her time. The scientific world knew her as a strict professional, and society knew her as a charismatic woman with a rare gift for explaining the most complex processes in simple words. She managed to turn the study of the brain into a sensation that interested not only specialists, but also the broad public. And this is not surprising. In her mouth, scientific facts sounded like revelations, and every report turned into an event. Do not change the channel. The most interesting part is ahead. Natalia Bekhtereva amazed colleagues and listeners not only with the depth of her knowledge, but also with the boldness of her views. In an era when many scientists waved away everything that did not fit into the strict frameworks of experiments and formulas, she spoke aloud about what others preferred to keep silent. Her credo sounded daring and honest. I do not belong to those scientists who claim, if I cannot measure it, then it simply does not exist. In these words lay the entire essence of her approach, an admission that the world is much wider than devices and tables. This was the position of a researcher who is not afraid to look into the zone of the unknown. She never denied the presence of riddles that are currently impossible to explain, and she believed that waving them away meant consciously robbing science. For Bekhtereva, the border between the rational and the mystical was not a wall. She saw it rather as a foggy line that, over time, could be crossed. Such an approach made her not just a scientist, but a pioneer, ready to step where others saw only a forbidden zone. Why is simplicity the hardest thing of all? Because the honest admission, "We do not know this," requires much more courage than a ready-made formula. Natalia Petrovna possessed precisely this rare courage to admit that science has not yet given all the answers. She reminded the world, the unknown does not disappear just because it is impossible to weigh or calculate. And it was precisely this quality that made her voice especially weighty and influential. Does the soul exist? This is a question that humanity has been asking itself for thousands of years, and Natalia Bekhtereva did not bypass it. For her, this was not an abstract philosophical dispute, but a living challenge of science that cannot be ignored. After all, what is the soul? It is not just a poetic metaphor or a church symbol, but something that seems to permeate the entire organism and does not obey the usual laws of matter. Walls, doors, ceilings. Nothing can prevent this something from being where it needs to be. The scientist cautiously noted that people call the soul that which seemingly leaves the body at the moment of a person's departure. This phenomenon was recorded in the stories of eyewitnesses and sometimes even in medical observations. However much philosophers and doctors might argue, the very fact of such testimonies forces one to at least think. After all, if the body does not live without the soul, then does the main question not arise? Does the soul continue its existence after biological processes cease? It is here that the question of questions arises, as Natalia Petrovna herself called it. We are used to thinking about life and its conclusion as a line with a clear dot at the end. But what if this dot is merely a transition to another level? What if consciousness is capable of existing separately from the body in a form currently incomprehensible to science? Bekhtereva expressed similar ideas not in the corridors, but publicly to the whole world. She was not afraid to question familiar dogmas and thereby led those who sought answers. And the more she spoke about the soul, the clearer it became that this was not about fantasies, but about a challenge for the science of the future. For Natalia Bekhtereva, the theme of the soul was not abstract philosophy or a beautiful metaphor. She admitted that for the first time, she truly seriously thought about this during her meeting with Vanga. That meeting became the moment when the greatest scientist and the legendary clairvoyant found themselves in the same space. It was then that the main question first arose in her consciousness. What happens to the soul when the body completes its journey? Not just, does it live in memories, but does it exist by itself as an independent reality? This admission sounded especially strong because Bekhtereva rarely spoke about the personal and always tried to stay within the framework of science. But here she allowed herself to speak honestly. This question had haunted her ever since she looked into the eyes of the woman who many considered an intermediary between worlds. Vanga made an impression on her so strong that the familiar picture of the world cracked. Even for a scientist with iron logic, such moments became a trigger for new reflections. Not everyone is ready to hear that the greatest neurophysiologist of modern times allowed the thought of the existence of a soul beyond the limits of scientific schemes. But it was exactly this honesty that made her words special. She did not claim that she knew the answer, and she did not build guesses for the sake of a sensation. She simply admitted it. From a certain moment, the question of the fate of the soul became personal for her, not just scientific. I never thought I would say this. It is exactly such admissions by a scientist that create real breakthroughs. After all, only those who are capable of looking inside themselves and admitting to doubts are capable of moving all of humanity forward. Bekhtereva's doubts did not hang in a void. The history of humanity is impossible to imagine without the stories of eyewitnesses who claimed, at the moment of a person's departure, something happens that cannot be explained by simple laws of physics. The English poet and artist William Blake assured that he saw, at the moment of the tragedy of his younger brother, a luminous substance rise from the body, which he called the liberated soul. For a romantic of the 19th century, such words sounded natural. But for the science of the 20th century, this became a challenge. How to interpret such testimonies? Similar stories appeared again and again. People who were near the departing described a strange phenomenon, the separation of invisible energy, a certain substance, as if leaving the body and heading into another space. These stories cannot be reduced only to fantasy. There are too many coincidences and repeating details. In the memories of eyewitnesses, identical images flashed. Lightness, radiance, the sensation of exiting beyond the limits of the familiar world. What was found in old archives is striking. In the 20th century, attempts even appeared to record similar phenomena with the help of devices. Medics and then physicists tried to observe the exit of the soul as an energetic process. In some cases, they spoke of a splash of unknown force, in others about visual manifestations resembling light or a cloud. In any case, the main thing coincided. Eyewitnesses saw the separation of that which they could not call otherwise than the soul. These testimonies are not singular, and are not limited by geography. From Europe to America, from ancient legends to modern cases, everything points to one and the same riddle. People of different eras and cultures described one and the same phenomenon, and this made it even more intriguing for researchers like Natalia Bekhtereva. Science could not remain on the sidelines of such striking testimonies. Already in the 20th century, doctors and researchers began to record unusual phenomena with devices to understand what happens at the moment of a person's departure. In Leningrad clinics, they managed to register a strange phenomenon. Devices picked up a certain substance, leaving the body in the last moments of life. This was not a subjective impression of eyewitnesses, but objective data entered into protocols. American scientists went further and tried not just to record the fact, but to measure it. For this, special scales were constructed with incredible sensitivity, capable of detecting changes in mass within the limits of a gram. The results stunned even the skeptics. At the moment of the tragedy, the body weight decreased by a value of 2 to 6.5 grams. Exactly this much, according to the data of the experiments, could be the mass of that very mysterious substance which many called the soul. This causes goosebumps every time you understand. We are talking not about myths or fairy tales, but about documented experiments. Agree, it is difficult to brush aside the fact that precise devices showed a loss of mass exactly at the moment of a person's departure. Is this really a coincidence? Or has science come close to solving one of the main secrets? Do not change the channel. The most interesting part is ahead. After all, it is exactly such discoveries that show the boundaries of science are still far from completion. And every step toward the riddle of the soul brings us closer to new, much louder sensations. Natalia Bekhtereva herself did not hide it. All her life, she observed and studied the living human brain. But at the same time, she constantly encountered phenomena that went beyond the scope of familiar explanations. She spoke directly. I, like everyone, including people of other specialties, inevitably encountered strange phenomena. Much can be explained already now, but not everything. I do not want to pretend that this does not exist. These words sounded like a challenge to the entire scientific community, which preferred to brush aside uncomfortable facts. The scientist emphasized, to close one's eyes to riddles means to leave the field for charlatans and speculators. She hoped that the time would come when science specifically would explain what today seems like mysticism. In her words, one could feel both the firmness of a researcher and the emotional sincerity of a person who is not afraid to admit their own doubts. It was a rare combination of rationality and openness to the world. When I realized this, I was very surprised. After all, before us is not a psychic and not a mystic, but an academician who dedicated decades to neurophysiology. She did not seek a sensation and did not strive to prove the supernatural. She only demanded honesty before the facts, and it was precisely this that made her position unique. Natalia Petrovna spoke about things that could overturn the understanding of life and man, but she believed, sooner or later science will find the key, and then strange phenomena will cease to be a riddle and will become part of new knowledge about human nature. Natalia Bekhtereva spoke extremely carefully, but because of this, her words sounded even weightier. She emphasized, conclusions are made not on the basis of guesses or fantasies, but on the basis of collected materials and observations. The general conclusion of our materials, she noted, consists in the fact that a certain percentage of people continue existence in another form, in the form of something separating from the body, and I would not want to call this otherwise than the soul. Such a formulation left no doubts. Even strict science could not ignore facts that pointed to the existence of something greater than simply a physical shell. She always avoided loud words and did not rush to make final conclusions. But when an academician with a world name admits that in the organism there really is something capable of separating and even outliving the person themselves, it sounds like a sensation. And it is not important how exactly to call it. Soul, energetic substance, or unknown dimension. The main thing is that the facts point to the possibility of the existence of another form of life beyond the limits of the familiar. In her approach, an amazing balance was felt. She did not build mystical guesses, but she also did not allow herself to frivolously brush aside the obvious. It was exactly this that made her conclusions especially strong. She seemed to be saying to us all, yes, we do not understand everything yet, but to close our eyes to the obvious means to betray science itself. That is exactly why every word of hers about the soul sounded not like a philosophical metaphor, but like a cautious yet firm admission. In a human being, there is something greater than cells and chemical reactions. Confirmation of her cautious conclusions can be found beyond the borders of Russia as well. French professor Michel Cora dedicated over 12 years to research on the phenomenon of the soul. During this time, he examined over 50,000 people, recording their condition with the help of modern medical equipment. The result of his many years of labor was stunning. He came to the conclusion that inside a human being exists something resembling a complex of energy clusters possessing their own parameters, which can be recorded by devices. These words are especially striking if we recall that we are talking not about a mystic and not about a philosopher, but about a practicing medic. Cora did not limit himself to guesses. He relied on numbers, graphs, results of examinations, and the more data he collected, the clearer it became. Science is coming right up to the solution of what for centuries was considered exclusively a subject of faith. The coincidence of the conclusions of Cora and Bekhtereva cannot be written off as an accident. Two scientists from different countries, relying on different methods, came to one and the same idea. They cautiously called this substance the soul, admitting that before us is a currently unsolved, but real part of human existence. Do not miss this opportunity to see the main thing. When different sciences, different countries, and different researchers converge on one thing, it means that humanity stands at the threshold of new knowledge. And the words of Bekhtereva in this context sound like part of a global conversation about secrets that are about to cease being secrets. Where is the soul located? This is a question humanity has been asking for more than 1 century. Some claimed that it lives in the heart, others that it is in the brain, third ones spoke of the spinal cord or even the stomach. But Natalia Bekhtereva rejected such attempts to localize the immeasurable. Her position was firm. The soul does not need a specific place. It is present in the entire organism and simultaneously can be outside of it. If it exists, then it is in the whole body, the scientist emphasized. This phrase sounded almost like a challenge to traditional ideas. After all, we are used to looking for a point of support, a specific organ where one can settle the soul. But Bekhtereva broke familiar schemes. For her, the soul was not a part of the body, but something greater that encompasses the entire organism and cannot be reduced to anatomy. She seemed to hint, we understand human nature too narrowly when we try to find the soul in one cell or tissue. This will force you to reconsider everything, for such a thought opens a whole new horizon for understanding man. If the soul is everywhere, then it is impossible to sort it into shelves and cut it out of the organism as a separate organ. It exists outside of space, in another plane, and that is exactly why science currently cannot catch it with devices. Bekhtereva spoke about this calmly and confidently, without sensational statements. She remained true to scientific restraint, but at the same time gave a hint that sounded stronger than any loud headline. The soul does not need a place, because it exists by itself in everything and everywhere. A special place in the discussion is occupied by the stories of people who have survived clinical death. Their testimony cannot simply be crossed out. They are too vivid, emotional, and repeating in details. Many claimed that at that moment they saw their own body from the side, heard the conversations of medics and relatives, and observed scenes that were happening in neighboring rooms. It would seem that consciousness should have been switched off, but they described everything with such precision that denying their experience became extremely difficult. Some spoke of visions that went beyond the limits of ordinary logic. People described entire spaces filled with light and an extraordinary sensation of peace. In these stories, it sounded that time disappeared, and the past, present, and future merged into one whole. For them, the tragedy became not an end, but a transition, an opportunity to peek into another dimension where consciousness exists by other laws. Some witnesses claimed that they saw events that were only yet to happen. And later, having returned to life, they recognized these moments, like déjà vu, but much stronger. This caused not only emotions, but also trembling. How to explain the foresight of what has not yet happened? Similar stories sounded all over the world, in different cultures and eras. One thought united them. The departure of the body does not mean the end of existence. People who survived this state perceived it as the exit of consciousness to a higher level. And it was exactly such testimonies that gave additional weight to the words of Natalia Bekhtereva. One cannot ignore facts only because they do not fit into the familiar world view. Natalia Bekhtereva left after herself not only a scientific discovery, but also a principle that should be a guiding star for every researcher. She categorically stated, "A scientist under no circumstances has the right to reject facts merely because they do not fit into his worldview." These words sounded like a manifesto, like a reminder that science is obliged to look the truth in the eye, however uncomfortable it might seem. Her position was tough and honest. She saw how many colleagues preferred to close their eyes to uncomfortable data just to preserve familiar schemes and not question their picture of the world. But Bekhtereva refused to compromise. For her, one thing was important. If a fact exists, it must be researched, not crossed out of reality. Such an approach made her a true scientist, a person capable of challenging not only the dogmas of society, but also her own convictions. It was in this that her greatness manifested. She showed an example of courage that is often lacking in science. Science begins not with ready-made answers, but with questions. And only he who is ready to admit the unknown is capable of approaching the truth. Her words were addressed not only to colleagues but to all of us. She seemed to say, if something does not fit into the familiar system, this is not a reason to reject it. This is a reason to think. And this lesson remains relevant today when we continue to seek answers to the most complex and forbidden questions about man, consciousness, and the soul. You have watched this video to the end, which means the topic of the soul and the legacy of Natalia Bekhtereva touched you as deeply as her words once touched the minds of thousands of listeners. Academician, woman legend, scientist with a global name. She left after herself not only discoveries in the field of the brain, but also honest admissions that force us to look at ourselves in a new way. Agree, it is not every day you hear a strict researcher with international authority speak about the soul so directly and boldly. We have walked the path together with you from scientific facts to personal admissions, from eyewitness testimonies to experiments, from doubts to firm conclusions, and all this in one story, full of sensations and unexpected revelations. But there will be even more ahead. New secrets, new discoveries, new thoughts that will force you to think and overturn familiar ideas. Do not put this off until tomorrow. Subscribe to our channel right now. Hit the bell so as not to miss new episodes. Like this video if you believe that such topics should sound louder. And definitely share this video with friends. Let them also learn that even science sometimes admits the existence of what is impossible to measure. Ahead are even more sensations from the life and works of Natalia Petrovna Bekhtereva. Turn on notifications, because the most important discoveries she left are still waiting for you in the next episodes. Thank you for being with us. Together we continue her work, ask uncomfortable questions, and seek honest answers to them.